Chapter 3. Mutiny of the Alton Guards. I left St. Louis on the Luella for Alton and arrived there on the 20th of May, 1846. The town was in a blaze of excitement caused by the news that General Taylor was surrounded by the Mexican troops on the Rio Grande. General Gaines, commanding at New Orleans, had issued a call for 50,000 volunteers, 4,000 from Illinois. Drums were beating all over town, and 2 hours after I landed, I enlisted. I went with the crowd, hurrahing and drinking whiskey until after several days we numbered 100 strong. Our company, the Alton Guards, elected our own officers, as did all the other volunteers. The election was held in a 10-pin alley. I was ambitious and wanted a commission. I worked hard for it, drilling the men in Scott's tactics. Thanks to Orderly Sergeant Hall and Captain N.A. Thompson of the City Guard in Boston, I was tolerably proficient in the manual and evolutions, spent my money freely on whiskey, defeated a major ward of Texas in fencing, and expected to get the first lieutenancy. A staff officer of Governor Ford called the meeting to order when a large red-faced man mounted the bar and delivered the following speech. Fellow citizens, I am Peter Goff, the butcher of Middletown, I am. I am the man that shot that sneaking white-livered Yankee abolitionist son of a bitch Lovejoy, I did. I want to be your captain, I do, and I will serve the yellow-bellied Mexicans the same, I will. I have treated you to $50 worth of whiskey, I have, and when elected captain, I will spend 50 more, I will. It is needless to say he was elected almost unanimously. My opponent for the first lieutenancy was one James W. Baker. I found I had no chance to win. My money was all gone, but I made a spread eagle speech with plenty of Halls of Montezuma and Golden Jesuses of Mexico. But alas, the suckers preferred whiskey present to Jesuses in the future. The company organized as follows. Captain Peter Goff, first lieutenant. James Baker, second lieutenants. Edward Fletcher, and Rodney Ferguson. Captain Goff appointed me the drill sergeant. We were quartered in an unfinished church on a hill overlooking the town. The company was composed of the floating population of a Mississippi river town, wild, reckless fellows, excellent material for soldiers, but requiring strict discipline to curb their lawless spirits. The officers, as might be expected, proved totally incompetent, took no care of their command, but spent their time in drinking and gambling. I sought to do my duty in drilling the men, but received no support from my superiors. I was obliged to give it up. I was so disgusted with the debauchery around me that I quit drinking and renewed my acquaintance with my fair friends at the Monticello Seminary. I heard often from my uncle's family, yet I did not call on them. Volunteers continued to arrive, and soon the complement was full. 4 regiments was organized. 1st Regiment Colonel John L. Hardin, 2nd Regiment Colonel Bissell, Lieutenant Colonel James L. D. Morrison, Major Xerxes F. Trail, 3rd Regiment Colonel Floyd, 4th Regiment Colonel E. D. Baker. We moved into camp in June. It was laid out in a beautiful grove in Upper Alton. We were uniformed as each company selected, and strange, grotesque costumes now filled the camp. Ours, Company A, 2nd Regiment, made choice of jacket and pants of blue mixed Kentucky jeans with yellow stripes across the breast, like a dragoon bugler. By permission, I had mine made with dark blue cloth with only my sergeant's chevrons, and it was quite a neat affair. Captain Goff seldom made an appearance in camp, and then he was generally drunk and abusive. One day he came down the company street raving drunk. He knocked down 2 privates, and then meeting Lieutenant Fletcher to show he was not impartial, sent him to grass. The men secured the maniac. He was knocked down, tied, and a guard placed over him. The other officers interfered, but they were driven out of camp. I had taken no part in the outbreak, and was seated on a log when a committee of the malcontents tendered me the command of the mutineers. This dangerous honor I declined, but they insisted, and yielding on their promising implicit obedience to my orders, I became the captain of 100 half-drunken desperadoes. We had drawn that morning several thousand rounds of ball and buck cartridge for target practice. This I issued at once, and was making a speech when Colonel Bissell rode up and ordered the release of Captain Goff. The unruly dogs only hooted him for his pains, and he rode off with threats of dire revenge. I had formed the company to march to town when I saw 2 companies of rifles advancing in line on our quarters. I sent out a few skirmishers to halt them, and if they continued to advance, to fire on them. I had all the axes kept busy chopping down trees to form barricades, and made quite formidable preparation for a vigorous defense when word was brought that a body of horsemen was approaching on the Alton Road. I went out to reconnoiter and recognized Colonels Bissell, Hardin, and Morrison, and two generals who proved to be Generals John E. Wool and Shields, with Governor Ford. As no troops accompanied them, I was satisfied there would be no fighting. That diplomacy and negotiation was now the order of the day. I hurried back to my command, and to their astonishment ordered them to fall in outside the barricade. They'd done so promptly. I addressed the ranks, commanded, "Present arms," which was neatly done, just as the cavalcade rode up. General Wool returned the salute, asked, "Who is your ringleader?" I replied I had that honor. The general gave us a lecture on the foolishness of our emuet, said we deserved death, but by the intercession of His Excellency Governor Ford, he would pardon us if we returned to duty with promises of good behavior for the future. Goff came forward and apologized. My command gave him 3 cheers. The thoughts of his whiskey made the hearts of the mutineers soften, and I really believe that if he gave the word, the suckers would have bayoneted me on the spot. So volatile is the popularity of a mob. General Wool inquired at Captain Goff, who had planned the barricades. I was designated as the engineer. The captain evidently wished to do me what harm he could. General Wool asked my name, age, where born, etc. He appeared surprised on learning I was not yet 17, and made some remark to the gentlemen around him, at which all laughed. He then said to me, "My man, if you don't get shot for insubordination, you will, if you live and see service, rise in the profession." Captain Goff now took command, marched the company back to their parade ground, made them a speech in which the egotistical "I" and the all-powerful word "whiskey" formed the groundwork, and ordered a barrel of the article into camp as a peace offering. The men made themselves hoarse in cheering the valiant captain, who so well understood and appreciated the natures of his reliable command. I was blamed for all the trouble, broke of my warrant, and reduced to the ranks, and this was the end of the mutiny of the guards. The time came to depart for Mexico about the middle of July. 6 companies of the 2nd Illinois Regiment with General Wool and staff embarked on the steamer convoy for New Orleans. 2 other boats, the Hannibal and Big Missouri, both crowded with volunteers, went with us. Our passage down the river proved very pleasant, though our accommodations were somewhat limited. My mind wandered in bright dreams of glory and renown in that region of romance, the land of Cortez and Montezuma. We landed and went into camp at Chalmette, the scene of the famed Battle of New Orleans, some 7 miles below the city. Our regiment's quarters was near the live oak under which tradition states General Packenham died. This camp was one great scene of drunkenness and debauchery. Officers, as well as the men, seemed to defy all military restraint and vie with each other who could commit the greatest excesses. Though I indulged freely when off duty, yet I believed in keeping up some discipline while on. And so disgusted I became with the state of things that I resolved to enlist in the regular army as soon as I could. I visited the city and hunted up my accommodating coffee girl of the French market, who appeared right glad to see me and was as complacent as ever. One night I visited with others a gambling establishment on St. Charles Street and won quite an amount of money. I started for camp in company of an old regular, one Brown. We had drank freely at my expense and made the night hideous with bacchanalian songs as we headed down the levee. It was past midnight, very dark, with a cold mist on the river. Old Brown lagged behind on the slippery path, and I supposed he was some distance in my rear, when something seemed to fall on me, and I fell crushed to the ground. Stunned, bewildered, almost senseless, I still retained consciousness enough to be aware that I was being dragged down the bank toward the river. What had happened? Where was my companion? These thoughts flashed in my mind when the painful fact that Brown himself was my assailant became only too evident. The old rascal evidently thought I was dead, for he laid me on the bank, partly resting in the water while he proceeded coolly to search my pockets. I lay still, feeling weak and faint, yet collecting all the energy and life left in me for a struggle for existence. He emptied my pockets and stooped to lift me into the water, when with a grip like death I grasped with both hands his throat, while my teeth fastened on his nose so desperately that they met. He struggled to throw me off, but though I was in a dreamy, languid state, and my head had a heavy roaring noise like a cataract in it, my hold could not be shaken off. His efforts were terrible, but all in vain. My grasp was immovable, like the embrace of a corpse. Brown, ignorant and superstitious, really imagined that such was the case, that the victim was trying to drag its murderer with it into the dark flood. When my muscles relaxed, he fell down in a swoon. I staggered to my feet and dashed some water on my head, which seemed all stoved in. It felt so soft and mashy. I was afraid I had received my death wound, and this idea made me determined that my destroyer should keep me company. I drew my bayonet and went for him. He had begun to recover and yelled with affright. I plunged at him with my weapon, which penetrated his neck, pinning him to the ground. I thought he was finished, and then hope sprang up that I might recover, and I wished I had not gone so far. I pulled out the bayonet and was glad to find the villain was alive. The weapon had passed through the thick muscles of the neck without touching a vital part, making a painful but not a serious wound. I made him give back my money. We repaired damages as well as we could and started for Chalmey. I compelled him to go ahead and kept my bayonet in hand. We reached camp at daylight, told a story of a row, and were sent to the hospital. A few days later, the Alton Guards embarked on the Brig T Street for Port Lavaca, Matagorda Bay in Texas. It was a fearful passage to me. I still suffered extremely from my injuries in my head. The heat was excessive with no awnings to the deck, which was densely crowded with the volunteers in an open state of mutiny, brought on from an unlimited indulgence in strong drink obtained by broaching the cargo which consisted of sutlers' goods. We landed and went into camp on a low prairie 12 miles from Lavaca. The ground was covered with water. It seemed to rain all the time, and the mumps, the measles, and the scarlet fever broke out among the troops. There was a great scarcity of doctors, hospital tents, and medical attendants, and many of the men died here. General Wool, with what men could march, pushed on for San Antonio, 160 miles in the interior. Though I was in the hospital, threatened with brain fever, I put out and joined the marching column. How I kept up, I don't know. Weak, emaciated, I struggled on. Anything was better than staying behind in the hospital, where men were dying every hour. My would-be murderer Brown stayed with me and assisted me every way in his power, although I harbored a suspicion that he only sought an opportunity to give me my quietus yet. I let him have his own way, giving him to understand, however, that Lieutenant Ferguson was carrying all my money. The marching was severe in the extreme. The lowland extended 70 miles covered with water and grass 3 foot high. One day I gave up and lay down, and I really wished to die. Nothing appeared real. The dark, murky sky, the grass, the trees all seemed to whirl and tip over in the most remarkable manner. Lieutenant Colonel Don Morrison rode up, and seeing how I was, dismounted, placed me in the saddle, and proceeded on with me until we overtook the wagons, when I was placed in one, and in that way reached San Antonio. General Wool displayed great energy now in breaking into proper military discipline. The rough material sent him for soldiers. The sick were examined, and all reported unfit for the long march before us received their discharge. I was one of these, and received mileage back to Alton, Illinois. This, with what money I had in the hands of Lieutenant Ferguson, amounted to nearly $300. Quite a little fortune in this part of the world.